It's a long-held belief that there's a fine line between genius and lunacy. Yup, and many sports stars are often described the same way. And given the pressure some of these dudes are under, well, they simply turn to drink or drugs to ease the burden. So, which athletes have ruined their career through drinking and drug use? Let's take a little look back through history at some stars from various sports who have succumbed to temptation. I mean, a list like this simply has to include Diego Maradona, right? This dude is widely regarded as one of, if not the greatest footballer of all time, and he was seriously addicted to cocaine. After a brief spell with Barcelona in the early to mid-80s, Diego settled in Naples with the unfashionable Napoli. Unfortunately, that city was, well, known for its undesirables, shall we say. Yup, Maradona's personality attracted people who might have lived on the wrong side of the law, for want of a better description, and he fell in with some who had easy access to cocaine. You would think this would be the end of his career though, right? Nah, Diego flourished in Naples and almost single-handedly delivered the Scudetto for the first time in Napoli's history in 1987, before then repeating the feat in 1990. However, his drug abuse was getting slightly out of hand, and a few years later, he would be sent home from World Cup '94 in disgrace, as he tested positive for ephedrine. Maradona would struggle with booze and drug addiction for the rest of his life, and would balloon up in weight in what was a sad end to the life of a man who scored the greatest goal the World Cup has ever seen against England in '86. Yeah, a flawed genius in every sense of the phrase. Another sports person who was completely absorbed by cocaine was New York Mets right fielder Darryl Strawberry. Strawberry was banned back in 1995 after testing positive for the illegal drug, but quickly found a new home at the Yankees after serving his suspension. But, as is so often the case when it comes to drugs such as cocaine, Strawberry relapsed, and a few years later, he would test positive again. I mean, it's possible that he turned to drugs a second time after going through cancer treatment. Like, that must be pretty tough. Having beaten cancer, he was set to make his return to the Yankees in 2000. Unfortunately for Strawberry, he would fail a drug test, which would effectively draw the curtains on his career in baseball. The suspension meant he would miss the whole of the 2000 season, and that was that. Another career ruined by cocaine. What can we say about George Best that hasn't already been said a million times before? Yup, possibly the biggest waste of talent of any athlete in history. Best is believed by some Manchester United fans to be the greatest British footballer of all time, even if that is a position ridiculed by most. Of course, Best had immense talent and helped United win the European Cup in 1968, but it was believed that he took to the pitch on numerous occasions drunk, which is quite simply disgraceful. This was a man who was widely regarded to be the most technical player of his generation, a generation dominated by the great Pele. But Best simply couldn't stay out of the pub, and toward the end of his career would skip plenty of games. Yeah, Best was the embodiment of the 1960s playboy, and ultimately, his career suffered for it. After leaving United at the age of 27, he would spend the next 9 years flitting around obscure leagues, like he played in America and Australia before it was cool to do so. Yeah, it's safe to say that George Best had it all, and drank it all away. The story of Len Bias is one of the most tragic cases you're ever likely to hear. Sadly, Len would succumb to his cocaine use shortly after being signed by the Boston Celtics back in 1986. Yup, this was a real tragedy for the Celtics and Bias's family, who simply weren't aware of his troubles with the party drug. Having just signed a deal with the Celtics, and with Reebok reportedly interested in sponsoring him, it's safe to say Len was in the mood to celebrate. But it wouldn't turn out well for him. After a late-night party at his university campus, where he had been snorting cocaine, Len would have a seizure and stop breathing. Emergency services failed to revive him, and his young career was over even before it began. Yeah, it's safe to say that this was one of the most heartbreaking sports stories of the 80s. Bias was so popular that despite never even playing in the NBA, his funeral attracted around 11,000 mourners. Truly heartbreaking. And what about the mercurial John Daly? Yup, the bad boy of 90s golf should have won way more than his 2 majors, but his dedication to alcohol was much stronger than it was to the game for large parts of his career. Wild Thing, as he's fittingly known, is still going even at 56, which has come as quite a surprise to many considering his lifestyle. Even his former coach, Butch Harmon, claimed that the most important thing in Daly's life is getting drunk. Wow. A string of alcohol-related incidents throughout his career has meant that John has never really fulfilled his potential too. Like, after those 2 majors in the early 1990s, the PGA Championship in 1991, followed by British Open success in '95, many people expected an era of of dominance for the man known for his huge driving capabilities. Sadly, Daly was much more interested in dominating the nearest bar after whatever tournament he played in. Yeah, it's likely his drinking habit took away a lot of his focus, and the Open win in the mid-90s would be the last major he ever won. A shocking waste of talent, wouldn't you agree? Thankfully, Daly is fit and sober these days, but his best golfing days are far behind him. Another sad story from the world of baseball is that of Steve Howe. Younger sports fans might not recognize the name of the former Dodgers, Twins, Rangers, and Yankees man, but he was supremely talented. But like many dudes on this list today, he had considerable problems with both alcohol and cocaine. I mean, Howe pretty much struggled with dependency issues throughout the majority of his career, and after checking into rehab back in '83, the pitcher would relapse and miss the whole of the '84 season through suspension. Yup, Steve Howe simply couldn't kick the habit, and he was suspended an incredible 7 times for drug and alcohol abuse over the course of his long career. Howe signed for the Yankees back in 1991 after a 4-year absence from the game thanks to his struggles, but just a year later, he would be just the second player in history to be banned for life after yet another positive drug test. But Howe would be successfully reinstated to the league after appeal, and had a pretty great season in '94, which would ultimately be his final real contribution to the sport. Sadly, Steve Howe would total his car in 2006, killing himself in the process. And you might have guessed it, there were illegal drugs in his system. Another tragic waste of talent, and a real what could have been tale, right? Which moves us nicely along to another pitching great with serious drug dependency issues. Dwight Gooden represented teams such as the Mets, the Yankees, and the Indians over the course of his career. But a lot of the money he made during his early career was spent on drug binges. Yup, like Howe, by all accounts, Gooden would have snorted the white lines on the baseball field if someone had told him he could get high. Gooden was first busted during spring training in '87 when he tested positive for cocaine. It is thought that his early drug use, coupled with some poor luck with injuries, contributed to Gooden never really kicking on and becoming an all-time great, something which he easily could have been if he had the willpower to just say no. Ricky Hatton is known for his brutal punching power, and as the former WBU, WBA, IBF, and the Ring light welterweight world champion. But rumors of drug abuse during his career have long plagued the popular Mancunian. Hatton was unbeaten at 43-0 when he came up against the legendary Floyd Mayweather back in 2007, but he was unfortunately KO'd in the 10th. A couple of years later, he would lose to Manny Pacquiao. No shame in either of those losses, right? But shortly after the Pacquiao fight, a newspaper sting filmed him snorting cocaine in what was a pretty sad piece of footage. Nobody knows if cocaine actually affected his career, but there was always murmurings. I mean, fighting anyone with that garbage in your system isn't going to do anyone any favors, much less so fighting two of the greatest to ever do it, wouldn't you say? Yup, Ricky Hatton achieved plenty over his career, but his love of partying almost certainly contributed to his relatively early retirement at just 33. Still, Prime Hatton was an absolute joy to watch. Any football fan is bound to know the name Paul Gascoigne. The English great is arguably the best player the home of football has ever produced, but he was, quite simply, a wild man. Over the years, there have been hundreds of stories of Gazza's alcohol abuse. Possibly the most infamous one came just before Euro '96 in his homeland. During a pre-tournament training trip to Hong Kong, the England squad were photographed in the now fabled dentist's chair. But what is that, I hear you cry? The dentist's chair was exactly what it sounded like. A dentist's chair in a bar which patrons could sit in, be spun around, and have alcohol poured in their mouths. Safe to say, once the media got a hold of these photos, there was uproar, and Gazza was made scapegoat. After scoring arguably England's finest ever goal at the tournament, Gascoigne would celebrate by lying down next to the goal and have his teammates squirt sports drinks into his mouth. A brilliant response to his critics. But as much of a character as he was, Gazza's drinking definitely impacted his career, and ultimately made it shorter than it should have been. These days, there are plenty of support systems in place for young athletes with drug or drink problems, which is helping to keep them all on the straight and narrow. Yep, definitely a good thing, I'd say.